the Dialed In Angling podcast presented by OnX Fish, Arneson's Rocky Point Resort, Strike Master, and 13 Fishing. Hey, welcome back to this week's podcast. Spring is in the air. Feels much different than last week when we were out in South Dakota and there was snow on the ground. We were fishing. It was cold. It was super fun, but we could have used weather like this. That's for sure. We did great out there. We had fun. We had some really good bite windows for walleyes, but right now things are firing. You know, I had a lot of friends up on the Rainy River this past weekend into the first part of this week, and same thing up there. You know, last week, I'd say midweek into late last week, when I sort of made a decision with Mitch and of course Chris Britton, we're like, you know, should we go to the Rainy? Should we head to South Dakota? Said South Dakota seemed like a safer bet. Up on Rainy, it seemed like things were a little bit slower. It was colder. It was definitely nastier weather up there. Even though we got a little snow in South Dakota, it was definitely nastier up there. Those guys earned their stripes when they were up fishing last week. So, you know, we sort of threw a dart at a dartboard, called Marcus, and headed to South Dakota, and it turned out great. You know, however, as we got towards the weekend, into the early part of this week, I really, really wanted to get up to the Rainy River just because they were putting up huge numbers, you know, big fish, but also huge numbers. I had a lot of friends that were, you know, catching 28, 29, 30-inch fish and then putting up numbers like crazy, you know, as far as, you know, 50, 60, 70. I even talked to one guy that he figured they got close to 90 fish in their boat. And that was as of Monday. So that is closed down now. That spring fishing is closed as of Tuesday. If you want to go up to the Rainy River, obviously sturgeon fishing is still open. Highly recommend it. Huge fan of sturgeon fishing. I have been for about 20 years. It's one of those trips that I love doing in the spring. Hopefully on this podcast, we'll be talking a little bit of spring sturgeon fishing. I want to bring my son up there at some point here with his buddies and, just take advantage of that fishery in general. There's a ton going on, you know, this week alone. As we get into next week, I'm hoping to do some crappie fishing. I'll be at Joe's Sporting Goods. I know next Wednesday, April 22nd, if you're in the Twin Cities, you want to swing in. I'm going to be talking about fine-tuning presentations for summer walleyes, but I'll also be touching on springtime walleyes, you know, as far as fishing different plastics, different hair jigs, sort of my go-tos as we get towards opener. You know, the cool part about Minnesota is like every year as we get closer to the opener, things start evolving, bites start changing, water temperatures vary. You know, we've had openers where we still have had ice on the lake, or the ice just went off the lake. And then we've had openers where we've had a month of ice off. I think this year it's going to be sort of in between. Yes, we have this cool down this weekend, but it looks like next week's going to be super nice. And so this week alone, I did some turkey hunting. I'm going to talk about that later in the podcast, but I picked up my boat from Rapid Marine, and I know a lot of people listening are kind of in that same time frame where, you know, they're just getting their boats out of storage. They're going through things. They're going through electronics. I want to talk a little bit about how I rigged my boat this year, how I'm going to get things set up. I'm already in the process of transferring rods and tackle trays into the boat. I want to get all that set up. I'm getting my crappie gear ready. I know a couple of weeks ago when I was on the podcast, I was literally in my office putting together, you know, stringing up lines on rods. I was putting together gear. I was going through my tackle trays, making sure all the jigs and everything, anything that was rusty or had line tied on it, went through all that stuff. That stuff is ready to go to transfer in my boat. I want to be 100% ready because right now in northern Minnesota, the lakes still have ice. You know, so from where I live north, all of that stuff still has ice. I know just driving down to St. Cloud and down towards the Twin Cities, there's a lot of lakes that are ice-free down there. As of today, Thursday, when I'm recording this podcast, we still have ice on the lakes. So instead of getting sidetracked with, you know, jumping in the boat and getting out crappie fishing, I want to be 100% ready in the boat and have my boat 100% ready so that when the ice does go off the lakes and we get warm temperatures like this, and panfish tend to slide in the shallows pretty quickly when we get ice out conditions where we have favorable weather. There's a lot of years where we get ice out and then it's cold and warm and cold and warm. The sun's getting a lot of power. So if we get some days like this where it's in the 50s, 60s, if we get a few days here where this ice can go out, I'm hoping maybe as early as this weekend or the first part of next week, I want to be 100% ready with my boat, because I know how quickly those panfish will slide into those shallow water areas. They seek out that warm water. We'll talk more about that after I talk about the boat rigging portion. Before I get sidetracked into thinking about getting on the water, I want to make sure that my boat's rigged in. Whether you're picking up your boat for the first time ever, like I am right now, or you're getting your boat out of storage, there's a process of things that I like to do to make sure that you're ready to hit the water and you're not going to have any issues. One, first of all, battery. Okay. Last fall, we talked about winterizing your boat, getting things ready. I know the group over at Rapid Marine gave us a bunch of good tips as far as keeping your batteries charged. I highly recommend, the first thing you do when you take your boat out of storage is check that battery. Hook it up to your battery chargers. Make sure all the batteries are charging as needed, making sure that you don't have bad cells, that you're not going to run into issues there. Secondly, your electronics, making sure turning all that stuff on. Electronics are functional. If you're looking at upgrading electronics, this is the time to do it. I know a lot of people that maybe in the past have used, their ice bundles or whatever for their forward-facing sonar, and they're looking at adding one in their boat at this time, or taking one of their ice bundles and transferring over to having like a hard black box in their boat and just getting that forward-facing sonar rigged up on their boat. This is the time to do it. Before dealerships and riggers and stuff start getting, to the point where they can't handle any more people coming in, now's the time to do it. We're starting to get towards crunch time as we get towards the end of April. I just know, being at Rapid Marine this week, picking my boat up, they were busy. Brian was running around like crazy back there. I know in service, they had a number of boats they were rigging. And so if you want to get on that schedule, you better do it now, sooner than later. And I know you probably have a jump down in the Twin Cities if you're listening, because you've had ice out for a while, and a lot of people have gone through these processes. But up here with the ice being on the lake, my whole focus this weekend is getting these rods and these tackle systems that I cleaned and got new line on and got all my rods ready. I want to get some of that stuff transferred in the boat. Now, I don't have to worry about transferring all of my walleye gear quite yet. But with Minnesota, obviously having catch and release bass fishing, I've got some rods rigged up with some small Crush City Mayors. I've also got some some small jerk baits tied on. I want to get those rods in the boat. I'm going to get my crappie rods in the boat, my crappie tackle systems, my plastics, my float systems, just all of that stuff in the boat. So I have all of that when I hit the water. Like I talked about briefly, in the podcast last week, all of the different fishing opportunities with border waters in Minnesota, Lake Travers, Big Stone, even maybe heading back out to Webster, South Dakota for a day. I do want to have some of my walleye gear ready to go so that I'm ready at the drop of a hat, because after next week, if the lakes go out, it's game on. So, I'm starting to transfer some of that stuff. Some of the things, obviously, putting back in my boat, life jackets, throwable life vests, making sure your fire extinguishers work, bilge pumps, any of that sort of thing. I'm always testing that stuff before I hit the water. Putting the motor muffs on my motor, making sure that thing's running. Even though I'm picking up a brand new boat, I'm putting fuel in it. And I'm putting the motor muffs on, making sure everything is operational. If you pull that thing out of storage, in particular, running that thing with the motor muffs on, getting some water, running that through that, so you don't have to, pull up to the landing, back it down, and then just come to find out you have a battery issue or a motor issue. Nothing worse than that when you're excited to get out fishing. So all of this stuff I like to accomplish right now while I'm sitting in my driveway. It's nice out, just going through my checklist. This is why I get geeked up for spring. This is why I want to be prepared for spring. Getting a day off is obviously a blessing, and getting a day off to hit the water where, the conditions are perfect, whether it's for pan fishing, for bass fishing, for border water walleye fishing or sturgeon fishing, whatever your fishing trips that you have planned here in April, you want to make sure you're 100% prepared and that you've got everything in the boat, pliers, tools. That's another thing that I always overlook. It's funny when I hit the ice, and I think a lot of other anglers can relate to this. When I hit the ice, early ice, I want to be as prepared as possible, right? I get out there, my batteries are charged for my Strike Master, I got my tools, I got my tackle, I got my ice rods, all new line on that. I try to be as prepared as possible. Picks, spud bars, float suits, all of that stuff, right? But inevitably when you get out there, you're always missing something. And so the more time that you can spend in your garage, in your shed, with your boat, just being around that, the light bulbs start clicking. I make little lists on my phone as I'm laying in bed drinking coffee, the things that I need to add to my boat, from tools to what I need to check, batteries, systems, just all of those checklists I go through this time of year. And inevitably, I'm going to hit the water in the spring, get out crappie fishing, and I'm going to be missing something. That's just the nature of the beast, and it takes a few times, before you're, pardon the pun, but dialed in as far as having everything in the boat ready to go. So when opener hits or you take that first big trip, you're not going to run into any big issues as far as what you forgot. I know in the past, getting a boat late in the year or just before opener or getting it rigged or whatever it was, I'm guilty of it. I remember, getting out on opener and getting my boat just before opener that year because there was a delay of electronics or a motor or whatever the case was. I got my boat late and we got out fishing. We were on Lake Mille Lacs for opener. It was super nice out. I remember it was just picture perfect opener. And I had forgot my net, my landing net. It's just one of those things that, I had actually taken the boat out a couple days before that crappie fishing, but we didn't need a net. And so forgetting to put the landing net in was a real bummer. When you're excited to be out on Mille Lacs for opener, you get those first big walleyes and you don't have a landing net. So, those processes of getting everything in the boat, getting everything rigged properly. If you didn't listen to the podcast a few weeks ago when I was gearing up, I put all new line on all my rods. That's just a thing I do in the spring. All new mono, especially. Check all my braid, put all new fluorocarbon leaders. I go through every single tackle tray. I like using tackle trays and going through every single one of those and making sure that everything's in order so that when you go to grab that particular tray, you've got everything in there. If you need to go purchase tackle, go to Fish USA, go to any of these retailers, and you're looking at, your tackle systems. If there's anything you need, you can get that thing completely stocked up and ready to go so that when you hit your next fishing trip, you're ready to go. And I hate not having something, especially when you get into spring, because like now, the fact that we can fish bass, prior to opener, catch and release only, that's going to be one of those times where, I may intend on going out crappie fishing, but the bass are biting, or the bass, the largemouth bass in particular might slide in a particular bay. And if I don't have what I need to throw for those fish, I'm going to be bummed. And so, that's going to be one of those evolution processes where I'm like, okay, next time I go out, I'm going to have bass specific stuff or my tackle trays with more of what I need, whether it's jig heads, whether it's hooks, whatever. It's just, I just know that it's going to come down to, oh man, I was in this weedy bay and I had a bunch of jerk baits, but I really needed some, jerk minnows or flukes or whatever it was. And, you're going to bump into that sort of thing. I'm excited to get out bass fishing. I know just seeing social media posts of people down in the Twin Cities catching bass, posting bass pictures. I think that's really going to ramp up the next few days before we get this cold front. If people aren't out turkey hunting, If they're not crappie fishing, I know a lot of people are going to be bass fishing. I know Mitch and I were out in South Dakota last week. He came home, and over the weekend, I know he wanted to do a few things with his boat, and he ended up going bass fishing. He was telling me it was great. They were catching largemouth like crazy. I can't wait to experience that. I'm super jacked to get these lakes ice free here in northern Minnesota so that I can get out and take advantage of this early ice bass season. So we're going to take a quick break. When I come back, let's talk a little bit about turkey hunting. I want to talk about some other spring fishing events that I'm going to get into. We've got a lot to talk about here on this episode of Dialed In Angling. Stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk a little spring turkey hunting in Minnesota. Stay tuned. OnX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you are after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. OnX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download OnX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water. Okay, welcome back. Let's get into a little bit of turkey hunting. I want to talk turkey hunting and then ultimately end the podcast with talking some strategy for springtime pan fishing. So I just want to recap a turkey trip I had. I put a post on Facebook. This week marks Minnesota and Wisconsin turkey opener, spring turkey hunting. I know a ton of people that, are into turkey hunting like I am, like my son. It's a great opportunity to get kids out in the outdoors and active and getting them hunting in situations where there's not a lot of people out there, especially up where I live in northern Minnesota. There's just not a lot of turkey hunters. And ever since my kids have been little, I've always told them, you're super fortunate to live where you're at in a rural area where you can go out turkey hunting in the morning before school. There's so many days where we turkey hunted before school, and we actually harvested a turkey before the kids had to go to school or before the bell rang even. There was so many times where, these birds got down off the roost and we were able to harvest a turkey, and we were fortunate enough to get a turkey. And, lo and behold, the kids would go off to school and tell their friends, and they were all excited about it. I've had my kids out spring turkey hunting basically since they were, 10 years old, 11 years old, I think, for my daughter, wherever they were comfortable holding a shotgun and shooting a shotgun. We patterned our guns, first of all. Always made sure when the kids were little that they were really comfortable shooting, the 20 gauge or whatever they were using at the time. And, with girls and boys, they're a little bit different. I know my daughter wasn't quite ready physically at like age 9 or 10, like my son was. It's just sort of sometimes the way it is. And it can be vice versa. I know a lot of girls that mature a little bit faster than boys. And so some of my buddies' friends, their daughters were ready to turkey hunt and their sons weren't. And, it's just a fun experience to be out in a blind together and to sort of share that moment. Also being out in the spring when the birds are chirping, the grouse are drumming, and just taking all of that stuff in, that spring sunshine. There's so many times where we've turkey hunted in the morning and then we crappie fish in the afternoon, or we went sucker fishing. We do a ton of fishing for white suckers around my neck of the woods. They run in the spring. They're fun to catch. It's another good activity with the kids where you can get them out, get them on a ton of fish where they're just catching them one after another. Spring turkey hunting is like that, where, it's interactive. You got gobblers gobbling back to you. You got hens chirping at you. The kids are seeing deer. They're seeing turkeys. You're not out there that long a period. I know a ton of people where they want to get their kids into like deer hunting, for example, but they don't want to burn them out as far as sitting on a stand for hours on end. Turkey hunting is sort of that gateway into deer hunting. It's sort of that cross between deer hunting and duck hunting, where it's interactive. The birds are chirping back and forth. There's lots of activity. There's deer out there, whatever. You can sit in a blind. I know amongst the turkey community all over, North America, there's a lot of people that won't sit in a blind. I highly recommend with kids, you sit in a blind. It's warmer. You can bring treats, snacks, whatever it may be, just to keep their interest up. They're fidgety. A lot of times those turkeys, they have such great eyesight that if you're not in the blind, you just fall into that trap of, the birds are coming in, but they see movement and they're gone. They won't close the deal on your decoys or whatever. With kids, I'm always sitting in the blind. I enjoy, even with my son, he's 18 now, because we were turkey hunting together on opener. We decided to jump in the blind, even though it wasn't particularly cold. A lot of times Minnesota turkey opener, it's really, really cold in the mornings. It's, a lot of times below freezing. And, we've had years where we had to bring a heater out there. And that wasn't the case this year, but we still decided to sit in the turkey blind. We had a phenomenal hunt. And it for me as a dad, I put a post on Facebook, but for me as a dad, it was really epic in the sense that, I look back on all those years I took the kids hunting before school started, right? My son's a senior this year. My daughter already graduated. And it was sort of bittersweet for me. I haven't had a turkey license in a number of years just because, I was always just happy taking them out, allowing them, or wanting to get them a bird that I didn't care about harvesting a turkey. I just wanted to call and sort of enjoy that experience with my kids. This year, because it was sort of that last year, my son's a senior, might be the last time that we turkey hunt like this in this setting, in the sense where next year he's going to be off to college. He's going to go, doing his own thing in life. He might want to come back and turkey hunt with dad, and that would be great. But this is sort of closing of a chapter for me as far as just taking those kids out before school and enjoying this experience. This is why I live where I live. People always ask, like, why do you live where you live? And I've said it a lot on the podcast. It's because there's lakes all around me. I have deer all around me. I can turkey hunt. There's grouse hunting. I love the state of Minnesota because there's so many different opportunities out there. And turkey hunting obviously wasn't around when I was a kid. For none of us, obviously the last 20 years, the rebound of the wild turkey in North America is a true success story. And to be able to go out turkey hunting with my kids, I just always loved it. So this year I bought a license, told my son, I said, let's get out. We're going to try to, harvest turkeys together, whether we get them together in one setting, or if you harvest one, I'm going to get a turkey license. I wanted to get out and do some morning hunting. It's been a number of years since I've done some afternoon hunts, but when you get these rapid warm-ups early in the season like this, you can really kill a lot of turkeys later in the day because those big flocks start to break up. You get birds that are branching off looking for hens. And so it's a prime opportunity to harvest a bird in the afternoon. So I thought, well, if I get a license, if I don't get one while I'm hunting with Robbie, I can always harvest one and try to get out in the afternoons and hunt a little bit. Again, another sort of, reflection of we still have ice on the lake. And so this is just a fun thing to do in the spring where you can get out, harvest a bird. So here's how the story goes. I love sharing hunting stories. We get out in the morning, and yesterday morning was just epic. I saw on Facebook, on Instagram, a ton of people had success in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And it was a lot of it's based on weather. Early season like this, when the birds are really flocked up, you really have to rely on some really good weather conditions. We've had openers where we've gotten out and there's snow on the ground and it's miserable and it's cloudy and it's drizzly or windy and cold and the birds aren't responding. Yesterday was quite the opposite. We got out in the blind. We sat down. I love getting out super early, especially if you don't know where rooster locations are. We got out super early in the morning. While it was still dark, we walked across a field. We hunted a field edge. We were hunting sort of where we were hunting is sort of a peninsula. So there's woods behind us, but then open area out front for strutting. And, the particular spot we've hunted it many times in the past. We've had birds come through the woods, which they do a lot during early season like this. And we've had birds just march across that field and come right to us. But we were hunting a buddy of mine's place, and we got out on this peninsula, got the decoys set up, got the blind set up, and just waited and listened and waited and listened. We didn't really hear many gobbles until it got closer to legal shooting. And I don't remember the exact time, but it was right around, maybe 6:15, 6:20, we heard our first gobble. And then once the first one started, they all started in. And so we had a ton of gobbling around us. Every turkey hunter's dream that when you get set up, there's gobbling in all directions around you. The chances of a tom responding or coming into the calls just increased by tenfold. We are pumped. We are jacked. We're high-fiving. We're so excited. I started calling. They were gobbling over the top of me. I'd call again over the top of them, and they were fired up. Well, then the birds got down off the roost, and nothing. It was radio silent. We don't know where they went. We weren't sure where they went. There was zero gobbling once they got off the roost. So I laid off the call. As much as I wanted to call, I called a few times. Early season like this, I really like calling, before those birds get down, just to let you know, hey, we're here, we're gobbling, or, we're yelping, we're clucking. And, so I called quite a bit over the top of them. But then when they got down, I called and there was no response. So I just left the birds alone. Took about an hour. All of a sudden, we started seeing birds come out to the field we were in, but across the field. And here comes some birds, but they're not, strutting. We could tell, of course, I forgot the binoculars, but we could tell they were gobblers, but we, just couldn't see. Well, lo and behold, here comes a bunch of jakes with two hens, and they're really not that fired up. They're just eating, kind of a lot of times what they do early season, and they just kind of fed out to us, but they did. They came over to our decoys. I called when they were on the far edge of the field. They didn't obviously gobble back, but they worked their way over to us, and then they just sat there. They went past us about 50 yards, and they ate, and they strutted around each other. So I told Robbie, I said, this is cool. You get to see birds. You get to see activity. Everything you dream of hunting. A lot of times it doesn't, for me anyway, it doesn't come down to harvesting the bird in particular as it does the cool experience that you have with that hunt. And these jakes and hens came right into our decoys. They were kind of working through our decoys. And then, like I said, they held up about 50 yards. So I told my son, that's cool. We got live decoys around us. And then all of a sudden that sun started popping up. It started getting a little warmer. And then the gobbling started. So about 8:30, we heard our first gobble. Of course, I jumped on the call and just kind of hit the call a little bit, clucked a few times, yelped, and we got an answer back. And then we got another answer. And then all of a sudden they all started gobbling. And they were in kind of an adjacent field. They were also in sort of this creek bottom. I called a few times. They were gobbling back. And at that point, the old me probably would have overcalled and just kept on calling and calling because I'm so excited. We sat there for, 2 hours with not a ton of activity as far as big gobblers. But now they're answering. So I did cluck. I did some purrs, a few yelps. I don't claim to be the world's greatest caller, but I did call a few times, and lo and behold, they started calling and gobbling. And then we had more gobblers. And then we started seeing birds, and we're like, wow, there's a lot of birds. Well, we had the most epic situation I've ever had in a turkey blind, where we still have these jakes and hens out to our left. And then all of a sudden, here comes the flock, the entire flock that probably hung together most of the winter. And here comes these birds. And there's probably 25 hens, 6 big gobblers with the group. And they come up into our field. And now they're about 100 yards away, just gobbling and strutting and doing their thing. As much as I wanted to call, I did not hit the call. I just let them sit there and they know where we're at. They can see our decoys now. They can see the jakes that are strutting right behind us, right? And I can see them. They would strut and they'd pop their heads up, they'd look, and then they'd go back to strutting. Well, lo and behold, they just started coming, and this giant flock of birds. I took a little quick video. If you go to my Facebook post, Tony Roach, just Facebook post, you can see a quick video and you can see 5 or 6 gobblers right in the one shot. They got so close to us that I didn't want to spook them with my phone or movement in the blind. And so I took a quick video and then we harvested our birds shortly after. But they came in, we picked out the 2 biggest toms, and on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, Robbie and I were able to get a double. Yeah, we shot them with our shotguns. We shotgun hunted this time for the birds. It was super fun. We could have shot them with our bows. They came in so close. An epic hunt that I will not forget with my son. It was awesome. It's the first time that I've ever, doubled up with turkeys with my kids. I've always just, like I said, let them shoot. We did have an opportunity a long time ago when the kids were little where they doubled up together. So that was pretty special. But this was the first time that my son and I, got a double turkey hunting. We were high-fiving. We got big, mature birds. We had an unbelievable hunt that him and I will never forget the rest of our lives, that, for years to come, when it comes to spring turkey hunting, or when we're in the boat, or maybe even when we're in a deer blind, or whatever the case may be, when we're recalling hunting, we're going to be talking about this hunt, because I've never had so many turkeys within 15 yards of me at one time, and so many turkeys just in one field. It was so cool to see. And I'm sure there's people in southern Minnesota and on farms where they get 70, 80 turkeys to come in at a time. And it's probably old hat to you. But for me, it was very cool to do this where we live before school, to get out turkey hunting for one last time before my son graduates this year as a senior. Pretty darn epic. I wanted to share my story on this podcast. I figured if you're a turkey hunter, even if you just love the outdoors, you get a kick out of the story. So that's our turkey story. Thanks for listening. Hey, stay tuned. I got some more dialed in angling coming your way. I want to talk a little more about spring fishing. Now that we've got turkeys off the brain, let's get back into some spring crappie fishing, because right now, as the lakes are out in the Twin Cities, as you get further north, even central Minnesota, some of the lakes are starting to go out. As quickly as it's warming up on a day like today, that we're having a really big warm up, those fish are going to slide in the shallow. So I want to talk about extremely shallow water, crappie, and pan fishing. Stay tuned. We got more dialed in angling after this. Arneson's Rocky Point Resort in northern Minnesota offers a little something for everyone. Nestled on Lake of the Woods' South Shore, it provides easy access to 14 remarkable reefs. Serious anglers know that Arneson's offers some of the best fishing, charter fishing, and small boat fishing options, all supported by the largest protected marina on the lake's South Shore. Accommodation selections range from 1 to 5 bedrooms. Equipped with all the modern conveniences, guests can enjoy a delightful dining experience and stunning lake views at the Rock Harbor Lodge, an on-site, full-service bar and restaurant. The 2 beaches provide hours of fun for the whole family. Whether you're seeking an idyllic fishing spot or a relaxing vacation, Arneson's Rocky Point has everything you need. Check them out at arnesonsresort.com. So days like these are prime days to target fish extremely shallow. It's like right after the ice goes out, and you get those first big warm-up days where it's like 70 degrees plus, especially on days where there's not a lot of wind, just high sun, no clouds. And man, it's amazing how quickly those fish can move up into that less than a foot of water sometimes. It's a lot of times it's less than 2 feet, but anything that's going to collect heat, whether it's the north end of the lake, it could be cattails, it could be, pencil reeds or bulrushes. It could be timber. It could just be a black bottom, that muddy bottom, those channels, those bays, those backwater areas. When I was younger, when we would fish from shore, we called it ditch fishing, and we did it all the time. I'd go with my dad, my uncles. I still do it today with my kids. If you listen to the podcast out in South Dakota, we talked about ditch fishing. I joke around with my friends about, fishing this really, really shallow water. And I'm talking like under 2 feet of water. And you can access a lot of these places by roadside, like I said, on an Onyx map, anywhere there's state land, public land that you can get down into these areas, back bays, channels where 2 lakes connect. There's current areas. There's a lot of these back river channels. A lot of times it may be just like a sort of a oxbow lake that's still connected to the river. Those fish will push in. They can feel that warmth of that water, that temperature change. Crappies and bluegills in particular, I mean, they're right up in there. And a lot of times this time of year, especially right after ice out, in that really, really shallow water, you'll see pike, you'll see bass, you'll see crappies, you'll see bluegills. I can tell you where I've, some of these ditch spots that I've fished where the fish aren't out in the main lake. Sometimes they're on the inside of the bulrushes or the inside of the cattails in like 6 inches of water. And so in those instances, I like to use like a float, like a casting bubble if you can, not just a bobber. A lot of times a bobber itself will spook fish. But if you look on the store shelves, if you go to your favorite retailer and look up casting bubbles, okay, they were frequently used for trout fishermen. If you see any of my panfish videos over the years, I rely on casting bubbles early in the season when I'm float fishing for panfish. And then I'm using really, really small plastics. I'm talking plastics that you would use for ice fishing. That straight tail plastic, that presentation that you typically would use for ice fishing. So it's really subtle. It mimics an invertebrate. It mimics something extremely small that you can cast out there on that float, on that casting bubble, and not spook the fish. And what I do a lot of times when I'm in under 2 feet of water, I'll actually cast past the fish, okay, and drag it into them so I'm not spooking them. When they're really, really shallow, especially in clear water, you're going to see that these fish are going to be easily spooked. They just are. They're coming out of that deep water and they're easily spooked. And, that's where you have to be kind of quiet. A lot of times they'll spook just from you walking along the shoreline. You see it a lot out in your boat. I see people that'll start fishing these back channels. I know for me personally, I fished Lake Minnetonka. Never grew up fishing Lake Minnetonka. Fished Lake Minnetonka just a few years ago. And all of those back channels, you'd see people rip back in there with their motors trimmed up and, going full bore, just sort of spooking fish. If I'm moving up into those really shallow water situations, I'm almost always using my trolling motor. Sometimes I used to bring an oar or like a push pole that I could push my way back in there. And then a lot of times when it's that shallow, instead of spot locking, okay, I'm bringing an old-fashioned anchor with me where I can set an anchor out and I can cast to those fish. Now, most of the time, don't get me wrong, I'm using spot lock. But in those situations where you're really, really shallow or those fish are super spooky, or you can really churn up the water, don't rely on your spot lock. Bring the old-fashioned anchor put it in the boat and use that in those situations. You're going to catch more fish. I know like bass anglers can relate because they use their power poling down in some of those situations where they're bass fishing extremely shallow. They catch way more fish. I know I'm at a disadvantage at times with my spot lock trolling motor, even guiding sometimes when I'm really shallow, if I don't have my anchor or, like I said, your poles, your power poles, you can't stay on those fish. You churn up the water, you're just at a disadvantage. And these are the prime days that those fish move in extremely shallow. Like I said, I love shore fishing. There's times where the ice isn't even off some of these lakes and they'll push back into these back channels. I know right now, as we speak, it's Thursday, it's nice weather. These fish are up shallow. Now, in that same breath, as we get towards this cold front, towards the weekend, those fish can easily pull back out just as quickly as they slid back in. And so, you want to make sure that you're staying, watching your surface temps and you're following those fish as they come and go. There's another scenario that I can lay out for you. And that's on a lot of these lakes as we get past this cold front, as we get into next week. Next week looks nice again. Well, looks like we're going to be in the 50s and 60s, a lot of high sun days. But as these fish pull out of those shallow water areas, they're going to stage up either in a basin adjacent to those areas or just deep water access to those channels. And, believe me, firsthand, I've been in these back channels and I've watched these fish with the backs, their backs coming out of the water. And as they come in, you just see waves and waves and waves of panfish. And then in the afternoon, evening, as that sun starts to get low and things start to cool down a little bit, you see waves and waves of fish push back out to deeper water. And so you got to really stay with the fish. You can't fish memories. Getting into these shallow water situations, I've had some really cool scenarios where I never thought fish would have been that shallow if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. And literally, I remember walking along a roadside ditch and looking down and just seeing thousands of sunfish and crappies. And they were literally in under 1 feet of water, and they were on the inside of the cattails because that was the warmest water. They can feel that. They're up in there. And, a lot of anglers think, crappies moving in the spring, they're spawning, they're in there to stay. Well, that's the case maybe in a week or two when the water temps start to warm up a little bit, especially down in the Twin Cities and southern Minnesota, central Minnesota, where you've had ice out for at least a week or more now. Yeah, maybe some of those backwater bays, you might get some crappies that are sliding up in there to spawn, but for the most part, they're coming up in there because of temperature. And what they'll do is they'll come up. As soon as it cools off, like I said, they'll push back out. And then as soon as it warms back up, they'll be back up in there again until that surface temperature starts to sort of moderate. And a lot of those fish, don't start spawning until surface temps get above 50 degrees. And we're far from that in northern Minnesota. Like I said, where I live right now, there's still ice on the lakes. It's going to be at least until the end of the week in my neck of the woods, maybe into next week now with the cool down before we really start seeing a lot of our lakes going out. But as we get towards next week and into that following weekend, kind of that last week of April, you're going to see widespread as far as lakes going out all over northern Minnesota. Options are going to be opening up. You're going to see a lot of people sliding up and fishing their cabin lakes and getting their docks out and doing that sort of thing. Don't overlook those shallow water situations. Or if there's a little bay to a lake or some cattails that you really can't access for most of the summer because it's weed choked, but it's right alongside a road, don't be afraid to stop and check it out this time of year or on days like today where it warms up extremely quickly, because you'll be amazed how many fish are piled up in that shallow water. So that's all I got for this week. Hopefully next week I'll have some more crappie stories for you. I know I'm chomping at the bit to get out pan fishing. Like I said, growing up, chasing suckers and sturgeon in my neck of the woods, I'm going to be doing some of that with my son and his buddies. My son plays baseball. I know right now he's in the baseball field, but he's thinking about fishing. So a lot of angling options are starting to open up. I'm jealous of all the bass picks I've been seeing from the Twin Cities and in Wisconsin. I'm glad to see people are getting out, taking advantage of this catch and release bass season. Now that it's allowed in Minnesota, I think that's great. It's just more angling opportunities for us as we get towards opener. Things just start to open up. Sturgeon fishing on the Rainy River. I got to do that. I've been talking to buddies about going up to Lake Superior, fishing cohos, either on the Minnesota or the Wisconsin side. There's so many angling opportunities that I want to do. There's things that I want to accomplish here before we get towards opener. And for me, opener, it's a family time, but then right after opener, it's just right back into guiding and being busy. So a lot of my fun trips that I want to do in the spring, I got to get them done. So the more of this weather that we can get, I'll take it. I love it. On days that are really crummy, like this weekend, I'm going to take advantage of putting my tackle together, putting my boat together, and really tying up loose ends, maybe do some honey-do lists, that sort of thing. Getting all that stuff checked and off my list so I can get out fishing the next warm day we have. So hopefully you can do the same. Hopefully I gave you a little bit of insight as far as fishing extremely shallow. We talked turkey hunting because I know there's a lot of outdoorsmen that listen to this. So hopefully you can get out turkey hunting with your loved ones, with your kids, grandkids, whatever it may be. So until next week, I'm your host, Tony Roach. This has been the Dialed In Angling Podcast.